to discuss. So, without any further background, let me ask Andrew to please set the scene and we'll take it from there.
Bonjour. Good afternoon. Improving teaching for foundation learning and literacy, the case of Zambia. Yeah, so the data that you're seeing is presenting the problem that we have in Zambia, and I'm sure most of the countries, I think I've heard, this is what they've said. We have learners that have been in school for 3 or more years, but they are not able to do basic operations, let alone even number recognition. A good example is what you're seeing, like in 2016, we had about 2% of the 80 schools that piloted. These learners were not able to recognize any number at all. And only 21% were able to recognize 4-digit numbers. 2019, the situation was almost the same. We had about 80% not able to recognize numbers, despite being in school for 5 years or so. For basic operations, if you check up there, you discover that we had about 51% of learners in the 80 schools that piloted that could not add or subtract, and only 36 were able to subtract from those schools. 2019, we had about 1,100 schools, but still we had about 48% of learners that could not do those 2 basic operations. And subtraction still, it was about 28%. Of course, the numbers had increased, but the improvement, you could tell. For higher operations, multiplication and division, it's even worse, where we had about 75% of our learners unable to multiply or divide. By 2019, I think I would say it was still around 70% of those who could not do those basic operations. The difference was about 14, 13 as those who could divide. So it was still bad. The challenges that we found, and we're still finding them now, even as we are working on them, is that we have learners that have a problem with understanding a number concept or number value. They would mention the number 8, then you tell them to point at 8 or pick 8 objects. They would not associate number to the value. They would also get confused in writing numbers. You tell them to write 12, they'll write 21. You get them to write 13, they'll write 31. So you have that problem. And clarity on how to present the problem on mathematical form, the terminologies, they need to understand. They don't understand what addition is, let alone the difference between multiplier and multiplicand. Those terminologies, they don't know them. The place value system confusion, it's even bigger, where if you tell them to add 7 plus 7 vertically, they would write the whole 14 under the ones. And the problem continues. So it's not only the learners that have a problem. I think we find it also with the teachers as well, that with our teachers, the problem that we found is our teacher training colleges, that is pre-service, the concentration is on higher level mathematics, where those teachers who are meant to teach the lower grades, they will spend time doing calculus, all those algebra things, instead of the basic numerals that they will need. There's also limited focus on the pedagogical content in our colleges. Teachers also in their preparation, there is there is a lot of theory than the practice which the learners in those lower levels need because they need to manipulate, but we don't have those. In Zambia, we seem to have a huge gap between when the teachers graduate and when they are deployed. Some of them have to wait for 7 years before they get into class to teach. And during the time of waiting, others become cross-border traders. And once they receive the letters to go to class, they walk from the markets and go straight to class. And you can agree with me now what will happen to that one who has been in that business, and then you've forgotten all these skills, and then you go in class. That's a problem. Yeah, so with all those problems, then the government wanted to have a solution, I think, in the early 2008, 2009, 10, somewhere there. We're looking for a solution. How can we solve that? Until we came to TAO, the TAO methodology. With the help of VVOB and UNICEF, they had to get it from Pratam and JEPA, and now it's the one that we're using. How does it work? Learners are assessed, and when these learners are assessed, they are put in their levels. If a learner is in grade 5 but is unable to recognize numbers like one who is in grade 3, they have to attend together. So they are grouped together, then given activities that will suit them, that will move from that level to another level. While we are doing that, teachers need to be coached and also mentored in school. So that's how the method works. And so we're saying the way it is being implemented in Zambia, we're focusing on grades 3, 4, 5, and then the instructors are the teachers themselves in the government schools. The timing is that we have this done outside the regular time of teaching. It's a remedial kind of teaching or program. The duration is that we do it in the terms. We have the 3 terms in a year, and we do that 1 hour per day. We alternate. Today if we do literacy, tomorrow we do numerous, and we keep on doing that. And we have assessments. These are major assessments where we have a baseline just to place the learners where they are, and then we have midline in May. Then we also have that in October, but we have informal assessments that we do in between so that the learners are put in the right levels. And we use materials that are simple to follow, of course, with very simple guidelines that we call teacher guides, where we use. So as we implement this, we put them in those levels. Those who cannot recognize numbers, we put them together. Those who can recognize single-digit numbers and so on up to 4-digit numbers, and we call those as levels. Beginner, then you don't know any number. Level 1, 1, and level 4, it means that the learner is able to recognize 4-digit numbers. Then our concentration then is on number recognition, then place value, and basic operations later when we are sure they are sure of this. We give more time to the areas where they don't understand. And as we do this, we want them to move from concrete to abstract, where they manipulate the materials that they use, the simple materials, then they begin to use. And the strategy that we are using is that the teacher needs to demonstrate first. After the teacher has demonstrated, they give them to do in group work, and then let the learners try individually. So as we do this, we use simple games, very, very simple games, the games that they know and the materials that they use in their daily life to have these. So for the teachers, we have to train these teachers in those methodologies that we want them, the basics that we want them to understand in those 4 days. It's a mini college, but it's done in 4 days. And as we do this, we want to make sure that soon after training, they go in school. There are mentors who continue mentoring them. Like I said, they'll have to see to it that there is quality in the teaching that they are implementing. Data is collected in the whole system, especially from the classroom. Then it's shared in the school with the school leaders to make decisions to improve the learning outcomes. So the structure of our training is that we begin with what we call master trainers. VVOB assists to train the master trainers from the ministry, And then those master trainers are trained in 8 days, but they have to practice for 20 days so that they don't just train what they don't understand. They need to try and try what they will teach the mentors. Then in turn, they will train the mentors who also have to train they train for 5 days, but they have to practice for 20 days as well. The same things that they will monitor, they will assist the teachers, they need to understand them. Then thereafter, the master trainers will train the teachers. This whole thing gives some trust and confidence in the ministry, and then some kind of ownership that we build as we build the capacity. Instead of us doing it, we train them and then they do it in the system. So this is how the trainings go. Yeah, 2 days we give it to the province, or I would say the state, we orient them. Then master trainers 8 days. Then we have the school leaders as well, just to orient them on how the program will be and give them some basics on how they will use the data. Then we have the mentors for 5 days. Then we end with the teachers for 4 days. When we did this is what we got as some of the results. I think we saw some increase in 2017, 13% increase. I think as we go up to 2019, there was a huge movement in terms of our improvement in terms of our performance, or the performance of our learners. But in 2021, we had a drop. Your guess is as good as mine for the visitor who visited us in the whole world. That was COVID. So our scaling, actually, it was informed by the results that we got in the pilot, and then, but as we expand, we also maintain our fidelity, and now we are working in about 3,000 plus schools. From the start, the ministry was engaged in the design of the program, the content development, the validation of the materials, and also the rolling out. We are working within the existing system of the ministry, from the school up to HQ. And this kind of working, it is helping the ministry to own the program, which we are happy with, and working very well, VVOB, with the government in Zambia. These are some of the actors that are helping implementing this in Zambia. I thank you.
Don't go anywhere. I'm going to ask you a question.
I see.
Is this working? Yes. I wanted to find out whether the COVID experience has affected the model in any way, or it's just created a delay. So it's set you back, but has the impact of COVID meant that you've had to adapt or change the model, or is it simply implementing the model at greater scale in a post-COVID?
Yeah, COVID affected in most places, or let's say the whole country. There were times that we had to close completely, that there was no contact, so learners were not learning. Of course, we tried to begin to prepare materials that would share with our ministry staff at zonal level, school level, but then we still had a problem on how to get to a learner, until when we tried to regroup, then we tried to make these contacts. But because we were not meeting, the learners were not meeting, it was difficult to get to them, although we tried to do it in a simple way, like having radios, but not every child was exposed to that. So we had an impact, and it affected us, yes.
But you're back to normal now?
Yes, we are back to normal, very normal.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate it. Please take a seat.
Thank you.
So we've talked a little bit about grades 3, 4, and 5, but obviously we need to prepare children earlier in the stage in the system, and I know that, Deputy Minister, that's a core focus for Zimbabwe. Could you give us a bit of an overview of the work that you've been doing on early child development?
Right, thank you very much. I don't want to call him interrogator, but maybe facilitator. Thank you very much for giving us this chance. I'll not be as sophisticated as Zambia, coming up with a lot of statistics. I'll try to be as practical as possible. Now, our journey on early childhood learning began largely and in serious terms around 1999, when the government of Zimbabwe commissioned a research group which we called a Commission of Inquiry into Education and Training. And one of the key recommendations that this commission came up with was the issue of formalizing early childhood development. With that, the major recommendation was that our early childhood development needed to be institutionalized so that it becomes part of the primary school module. Before then, what used to happen was that we used to have what we called play centers, where no formal or structured learning was taking place for those young minds, but rather it was just a play center and no formal learning was taking place. And then this commission recommended that there be a structured way of dealing with early childhood development. In 2005, those recommendations were adopted and then implemented. And then we began to have early child development moving away from community play centers into the school system so that it became part of the school system. In Zimbabwe, we used to have grade 1 to grade 7. But now with the introduction and institutionalization of early child development, which was ECDA and ECDB, our primary school period extended from 7 years to 9 years. And as I speak, our primary school system begins from ECDA up to grade 7, which is 9 years. Now, that brought its own problems, one of which was the issue of capacity of teachers to handle that. And therefore, we began a program in partnership with UNICEF and other partners, where we would take community champions, people interested in education, but not sufficiently academically apt to go for proper teacher training. So those were then staff developed to handle those classes in the primary school. They are what we used to call our para-professionals. Now, we then developed further and found that it was important that we formalize the training of those teachers so that they go into proper teacher training colleges and then they receive 4-year teacher training in handling early childhood development. So that is what is happening even up to now. We have now extended that to go into bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and PhDs for those teachers to handle those early learners. It is our belief as Zimbabwe that early childhood learning is very important and creates a strong foundation for lifelong learning. So that is why the government has invested so much in that area. The other problem that we realized was that our education system, now I'm speaking from early childhood up to grade 7 and even beyond, was that we needed to change the philosophy of our education system and move away from simple remembering, where people would, those of you who went to school during my days in the 70s and 60s will recall that rote learning used to be the order of the day, how much you could remember, memorizing facts and things like that. But we realized that that did not help us in creating new knowledge, but rather we kept on regurgitating old knowledge and we didn't have an opportunity to create our own knowledge systems. And therefore, we then introduced new learning methods which then helped our children to develop problem-solving skills, to develop creativity skills so that they create new things in their society. And this happens, it runs through right from ECD up to higher levels. So this is the theme that runs through our education system so that creativity, innovation, and problem-solving become the key pillars of whatever we do. And to achieve that, we needed to develop material so that our early learners and also our mid-learners in the junior level of the primary school and the senior level of the school system, we needed now to create material for that. And there was no better place than using our own teachers to create that material. So a larger part of our storytelling books, a larger part of our textbooks are now developed by our own teachers. We discovered the folly that most of the material that we used in the schools is not developed by teachers who are better placed to understand the learning development of our learners. So hence, a deliberate thrust to involve our teachers in that kind of creativity. We have also drafted an early learning policy, which is now in its final stages of approval. Some of the key pillars of that early learning policy includes governance, health issues of those learners, how to handle health issues at that level, assessment, how do you assess children at that early level, going upwards, and also teaching and learning methods that we need to use. So that policy, and also the financing of the early learning childhood development. So that policy has been drafted, it has gone through a number of stakeholder consultations, it is now at its final approval stages. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's the bit of story about Zimbabwe, our experience, particularly on foundational learning. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Please give him a round of applause. Minister, I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into some specifics. You talked a lot about the role of teachers. We've heard about that from Ben earlier. We've heard about that in the GEM report recommendations, Manos. Is that empowerment of teachers and the ability to incorporate, the development of the resources by the teachers, would you regard that as the single most important ingredient in what you've done, or would you regard it as something else?
Yeah, it is definitely not the single most important. It is part of. We are trying to widen our materials development strategy so that we don't limit it to only the commercial people, but also to involve those that have to deal with children on a daily basis. So it's part of the wider strategy. Thank you.
Manos, I want to pull you into this, if you don't mind. I think we've all seen the findings of the GEM report. We've seen the recommendations and the 8 recommendations that you're making for African governments. But I think Dr. Obi earlier challenged people to suggest 3 things that you could do, which leaves me to ask you for one. Of those 8 things, if you were given the funding and the resources, which one would you do in 2023?
It's of course a very, very difficult question. And I think we also heard earlier the notional Minister of Africa's Education giving a short list of 3. I think one of the important things that the report is trying to say, and it actually says it explicitly, is that this issue will not be solved through external solutions. All solutions will have to be coming from the countries themselves. And so I would like to avoid going on one of the recommendations in particular. I would like to speak up to the one that I feel is the one that we can contribute from our side. And of course, many people may be asking, why has a global report decided to engage itself with a regional theme or a continental theme in this case? Well, I think the obvious thing is that for us, the Sustainable Development Goals essentially is an agenda that stands on 2 legs. It's the poverty reduction leg and it's the sustainability leg, at least the environmental sustainability, because poverty is also part of sustainable development. And we feel it has been a difficult issue, but not enough attention has been placed on that. And often this is because people don't want to talk about it. Either because they don't know the situation or sometimes they refuse to see and discuss, especially in some contexts where it can be a difficult discussion. So I would like to choose the recommendation that focuses on the peer learning. We feel it is very important in order to improve formal education, in order to improve formal learning. I think we need some non-formal processes among those who take decisions. Now, of course, there can also be informal processes. I was very lucky last month to attend a dinner with ministers, and it was the most fascinating discussion on the issue of home language. whether countries should or should not invest in home language. I won't disclose, but it was just indicative of how passionate some issues can become in education. So, but it was a very good example of an informal exchange that I think must have left to most ministers' minds some impression, because it's not often that you see that happening. But what we feel is that, okay, that was very powerful, and of course for all of us, we learn sometimes informally, but we need to organize and structure a little bit that dialogue. So that's why we're so happy that the African Union has decided to look at this issue, to use its structure of clusters for the monitoring of the continental education strategy, and to see how we can combine some of those who have been working independently, how to bring the teams that work on curriculum, the teams that work on teachers, the teams that work on planning together to discuss. That's the purpose of the network that the GEM report and ADEA are supporting, or intend to support the African Union to achieve. So, and why is that? Well, we have also a broader context that I would like to mention that can be supportive. I would have perhaps talked about data in general, but I think UNESCO Institute for Statistics is perhaps the main authority on this talk. So, but we have been working with UIS to help countries set national targets. Over the last year and a half, it has been a commitment that countries made in 2015 in what we call the Framework for Action, which is the roadmap for achieving SDG 4. And there, countries said, we will set our national targets. And that was a very important commitment. It almost got lost. But we tried very hard, and we have now reached a stage where essentially 70% of countries have directly set some types of targets. It is little, in the case of learning, is only half the countries, but for instance, on the percentage of children who complete primary, it's 80%. So there is really a movement behind, and that provides the framework, because it is countries that say, this is what we want to achieve. And it is through the dialogue about which countries are moving fast and which countries are moving slow that people start asking the questions themselves. Because unless you really realize that this is an important issue, it won't go anywhere. All we're trying to do is support that dialogue, support that process, because sometimes you need to have it organized. And I would like to say that in the next year, building on the relationships we've built with the first 12 countries in this process, to bring more. And to make countries talk to each other on the issues that they choose, that they think are important.
Thank you. I think empowering countries to be able to make those difficult choices and prioritize themselves and suit their own context is the full message there. Armando, I know Manos mentioned data, which I think is a nice little segue into a question for you. I know you're doing a lot of work on data and trying to potentially increase the regularity within which we can see data, adapt and change things. Is that for you the most important piece of this puzzle, or is it?
Thank you, Tim, and greetings to everyone. I will follow the path that Emmanuel said. It's difficult to point that the most important piece of it. Maybe I should start pointing out the preconditions that I see that will inform our choices as we move forward to solve this crisis. As it was reported today on the launch of Spotlight report, tomorrow we will still have 20% of children in Africa out of school. Tomorrow, the ratio, the teacher-student ratio will still be around 60 to 70% in some countries. Tomorrow, the number of schools will remain the same, or very small changes will happen. So I also saw a report from UNICEF saying that if we keep this pace, learning will take 7 years to gain the reading competencies and 11 years to gain the numeracy competencies, if something is not done to change the pace. So what we are thinking is, how long are we willing to take until we solve this problem. Are we willing to take 5 years, 10 years, and then we say, okay, we have solved the issue after 10 years again, or we need to solve it today, as we are saying. So if the pace is low and the conditions probably are the same, what will make that change to have the solutions tomorrow, to make our children readers and able to do basic maths? On our perspective, what will make that change, and we are sometimes not emphasizing sufficiently, are citizens. Unless we engage citizens, communities, parents in the solutions, I don't believe we will have that change happening in 1 year or 2 years. Unless we found sometimes unpopular solutions to learning, we will keep this discussion for years without solution. So our proposal is that, yes, as People's Action for Learning, we are now finalizing a new assessment tool using our citizen-led approach. As always, it will be also a public good, and we are planning and inviting also all partners here to join this process. We are planning to do large-scale assessments in 15 countries to have samples that are national representative and can inform governments also what needs to be done. So the kind of assessment that we need is not just to point the problem, but to inform actions. The second element that I found important is also engage citizens in solutions. The experience of Zambia that we have seen here, and that's also a similar process that PAL network members are doing, have proven that citizens with rigorous training, with basic conditions of, in terms of literacy and numeracy, they can support children to read and do basic maths in 40 to 50 days. Citizens, they can organize learning camps at their community, engage in sometimes the schools that are at the community level and the teachers, but doing it collectively and solving the problem and helping children to read in 40 to 50 days. Those are the kind of solutions that I think we can embrace if we are willing to solve this issue now. And when I think in a situation where we have managed to get that solution, we have managed to have our children reading and doing basic maths as the condition for them to learn other contents in school, where do I imagine it happening? Where do I see it happening? I see it happening in a village where the village elders, the leaders, the administrators, they call the parents, they call the school, they call all the stakeholders, and they say, can we check if our children in this village are learning? And using the proven tools that are available, and I know our partners here are also developing a data compact with tools that can be used to assess learning. Using those tools, going household to household, finding out what is the situation of our village. From that data that they get, asking themselves what they can do to improve learning of their children. If they can organize learning camps at community level, if they can cooperate with the school and make sure that all children, even those who attend in school who are not reading, can be helped. If they can go and find other children who are not attending school also. And in that reunion, under the big tree, or any other place that the community chooses, they agree to say, me, Mario, and Johanna, we will help these 20 children who are in this part of our village. And then Josephine and Anthony will say, we will also help the other 20 children who are in that other part of the village. And with that movement, after 40 to 50 days, or maybe 1 month or two, we can say that all children in our village can read and do basic maths. I'm not saying that they will all learn at the same time. We will still have few who are far, maybe from the village. And where I see it happening is when people will say, we have solved the situation of this, but there are other 7 children in that corner of the village. Let's go and found them and make them readers. Those are the areas and the house we think we could help to solve this problem today, not in 10 years.
Thank you, Amanda. So, we've heard from Andrew that there's a significant focus on teachers, right? And you have to empower teachers. We've heard from Manos that we need to put in place large-scale peer learning structures that allow policymakers to learn from each other and experience what others are experiencing. And we've heard from Armando that we need to focus on a citizen mass-led solution. Deputy Minister, I would have put to you, as a policymaker, how do you navigate an environment where the messaging around prioritization is different? How do you, what from a policymaking perspective would be the single kind of most useful thing for you to support the work that you're trying to do, to try and help structure the support that can come in? I was asking that we've heard 3 different messages from 3 different people. Focus on teachers, focus on enabling networks at a policy-making level to ensure peer learning, and focus on citizen-led, citizen-owned solutions. But for you as a policymaker, if you could ask for one thing from the community that's offering support, what would that thing be?
Thank you very much for the question. From my perspective, I think what would be very important is to zero in on teacher capacity development. Because for teachers, it's important because that's their vocation, that's their profession, their dedication is assured. And therefore, I think a major focus on teachers, although we may not do away with the community-led solutions, children go back home carrying homework and the involvement of their parents, peers, and also their siblings becomes very important. But on the lead, I think teacher capacity development to me becomes a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to open it up quickly to the audience to see if you have any questions or comments that you want to make based on what the panelists have said. Yes? I have somebody with a mic. You could quickly just introduce yourself and limit yourself to 30 seconds if you can, please. While we're doing that, do I have a timekeeper that wants to? You can shout if you.
Hello. Good. This one works. I mean, thanks to the presenters. I really like, all the different, positive things you're doing and the great work. The results are really evident that we can build on them and scale them up. Except that I really didn't hear a lot about the population of learners, those with disabilities. Might be physical, might be, intelligent disabilities. So I'd just like to hear from you all. maybe one of you, I mean, as to how you were able to work with students or learners in that category. Thank you.
Might take a couple. I think there were a couple of other people who had their hands up, so let's take one or two and then we can.
Obrigada. Thank you. I'm speaking Portuguese. Have translated.
I'm sorry, say again.
I'm sorry. I come from Mozambique. Ok. Quero saudar todas as apresentações que foram feitas. Para o caso de...
Could you try again?
Ok. Quero agradecer as apresentações que foram feitas. Para o caso de Moçambique, nós temos uma experiência de funcionamento dos conselhos de escola, que é um grupo de pais cujos filhos estão naquela escola, o líder comunitário, e que participam na gestão da escola. Não?
I'm sorry, one sec. Is anyone getting an English translation? I'm not. No.
3.
Channel 3.
3. Yes, 3.
Okay. One more time.
1? Is 1? Okay. Okay. Continue? Continue? Ok. Então, eu estava a dizer que nós temos uma experiência em Moçambique de... Is 1 translated? Okay. Temos uma experiência em Moçambique do funcionamento dos conselhos de escola, em que os pais e a comunidade participam na gestão escolar. E nós entendemos que não se pode transferir aquilo que é responsabilidade do professor para a comunidade. A comunidade tem uma responsabilidade e o professor tem outra. O que nós fazemos é potenciar o professor para que seja capaz de transmitir conhecimento. É verdade que é um grande desafio para o nosso país, porque o nosso território é muito grande e temos zonas muito distantes dos centros urbanos. O outro problema que nós temos é o rácio aluno-professor. Temos turmas de 100 alunos, de 80 alunos, que é muito complicado fazer a gestão. O que eu gostaria de perceber da experiência da Zâmbia, diz que consegue fazer a separação dos alunos em função do nível de conhecimento que têm. Olhando para a nossa situação de Moçambique, com este rácio de alunos, professor 100, 80, que conselho nos daria para que nós pudéssemos apoiar estes professores a gerir a evolução dos seus alunos em função do nível de conhecimento que eles vão tendo? Obrigada.
Thank you. I think I'll take those two quickly because did you understand the question? Yeah. So the question was, in Mozambique, where you have class sizes of 80 students per teacher in kind of remote rural areas, how can you apply a TARA methodology into a potentially diffuse and large class? And is it something that it can be done on that scale? That's the question. Let's start with that, with you, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, the situation is the same with Zambia as well. We have such classes. So in a school, we train 3 teachers. That's the average. But I think we still have a situation where we have no teachers. But let me begin with a 3. So we train a grade 3 teacher, grade 4, grade 5. And so when these are trained, we ask them to assess the learners. I'll assess the learners in grade 3. Team will assess the learners in grade 4. The other colleague will assess the learners in grade 5. Then we'll put them in there are levels. Then I'll handle maybe the lower levels, those who cannot recognize numbers and maybe one digit. These are closed. They will be put in one group. Then team will get these who can handle 3-digit numbers, 2 and 3. They are together, and then Amanda will handle the level 4. So we'll meet them in those time when we are doing our remedial, which we call catch-up. Then we'll all go, but I'll take the levels and not really the grades. But the numbers can still be high in those levels. So in that case where you don't have teachers, you assess them, but then concentrate on those in the lower levels. So the manpower or the force, the workforce that is there, can concentrate on the lowers, because these are the ones that you want to jump from where they are to at least better levels. So from 80, I'm sure you have about 50 or 40 that I need. Then leave these others, you can give them independent learning activities, while the teacher-learner contact is given to these who are lower, in a case where you have large numbers. That's what we do.
I want to just come back to the first question on disability and incorporating children with disabilities into these programs. Is there anyone that wants to come back on that specifically?
I can first of all admit that in this first Spotlight report we did not address the issue of learners with disabilities, and that is partly because the way we describe the magnitude of the problem, it affects practically every learner, or the vast majority of learners. So that was to some extent intentional, but let us not forget that just 2 years ago, our global report focused on the theme of inclusion, and we're very sensitive to the issues that are involved, and we will definitely come back to this issue in the forthcoming editions of the Spotlight. The key message, and I think it's a very important message, is that in Africa there is much more acceptance of the fact that all children need to be in the same classroom. Like, there is a real belief in inclusive classrooms that you don't find in some other parts of the world. And that's a fantastic strength to build on in terms of attitudes and understanding. In reality, we also see, of course, that the resource issue is very difficult, because teaching assistants, we're just talking about 60 or 56, I think we presented, trained teachers per student, so 56 students per trained teacher, which means, where are we going to find the teaching assistants? So there is a need there for governments to contemplate the idea of supporting that cadre of people who will support teachers. And that, of course, goes back to the question from Mozambique, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of management of a classroom and having people on the ground who are teaching assistants and with multiple skills, obviously, who can release some of the pressure the main teacher has. That is an idea that has not yet come, and I think that is perhaps the one that we should be focusing on, notwithstanding the fact that resources are limited. It is a key issue. So far, African countries have been generally managing very well the transition from the idea of special school to using those schools as resource centers to serve multiple schools. So that process exists. I think that's what I mean. Africa is advanced in that sense. But these itinerant teachers who have to serve several schools need the right level of support to be able to do it. And they need to also have the support that perhaps the teachers themselves, the mainstream teachers, like the classroom teachers, need to have. Because as we were describing, in Zambia, you heard, there are issues with the methodology of teaching, the pedagogy. So those teaching assistants also need to be trained in those pedagogies.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm being told we have almost run out of time. So,
Hello.
how did you get that mic? 10 seconds.
So my name is Herin. I represent EduTalk Africa Radio. I'm a mathematician. I've been working with teachers in Rwanda, intervening around maths and science too. I just have a few comments. One, we're talking about foundational learning. I was a little disturbed there's no lady in that panel, because at the lower level, we tend to have more female teachers, and we need to ask ourselves why that's the case. Number two, I really appreciate the interventions happening, but I find it a little problematic when everything is presented as very rosy and without a presentation of what are some of the challenges that we faced. For example, I know we talked about, for example, using master trainers. There's a lot of problems around that, using that in our context. And it's important that in such forums we are able to present very balanced presentations, because sometimes our leaders come to these meetings and go back to implement the things that you're saying. And we create problems for our teachers. Number three, finally, I really like what the PAL network person said about using stakeholders. But I also want to say that as we talk about investing more and investing better, teacher voice in these conversations are very critical. And I think we need to ask ourselves, we need to bring teachers more into these conversations and hear what they're saying. And just going back to the balanced conversation, listening to the person from Zimbabwe, you presented a very great presentation of what's going on, but I've been following what's going on in Zimbabwe. And I just want to read a tweet here by one of your organizations of teachers. Recently, they said they were holding a policy dialogue with MPs in Harare, and the issues presented are the unsustainability of the color, which is one of your assessment practices, and its cost on both teachers and learners. So generally, let's be balanced in our conversation so that we can really interrogate the things that we're doing on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid we are out of time. Does any of the panelists want to comment on any of the...
But thank you very much. I want to agree with the last speaker that it is very important that we don't present one-sided narratives of what is happening. But usually there's always a temptation to talk about the good things. However, coming to challenges, I think issues around funding present very big challenges. Issues around infrastructure, especially when you come into Zimbabwe, where we have institutionalized ECDA and ECDB in the school system. That presents infrastructural challenges in terms of classroom provision in those schools. There's also the issue of resource materials, teaching resources, play resources, and so forth. So those are some of the challenges. Coming to the color means, for those who might not be familiar with that, is continuous assessment learning activities. It is a recently introduced assessment model which complements the competency-based curriculum that we introduced a few years ago. Now, it is meant to ensure that our students are continuously assessed, rather than allow our students, they are in primary school for 9 years, and then we sacrifice their fate in 1.5 hours of a summative examination. So it is a way of continuously assessing them and putting aside some marks where in the final examination, 30% is going to come from those activities and then 70% from the summative examinations. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I know there's lots of other people with questions. I'm afraid we're a victim of time, so we're going to have to move on, but I hope you can find the panelists after the session and ask them directly. From GPE, can I ask you to just quickly wrap up and summarize the discussion, and then we will close the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, and thank you to everyone for the great panel. So I'm Ramya Vivekanandan from the Global Partnership for Education, and along with Cleo from Gates, we're rapporteuring this session. So just to tie things together, I think there's 4 key issues that really came out, and I think that all of our speakers, as well as the Q&A from the audience, emphasized. So number 1, I think, is really about teachers and supporting and empowering teachers as well. We heard about in Zambia how they were able to shift from a system where traditionally teacher preparation has been very theoretical and focused on high-level content to shifting to an approach through the teaching at the right level, where teachers were equipped with intensive training and in-school support for mentoring and support in collecting data, and how that's had an impact and is having an impact and is being scaled up. From the Deputy Minister of Education from Zimbabwe, and the shift in terms of bringing the early childhood subsector into the primary schools, he spoke to us about making sure that teachers had the capacity to handle this and working to train teachers and staff and formalizing that training within the teacher training institutions. We also heard from the audience here about the importance of ensuring that learners with disabilities are also supported by teachers, even if they're serving several schools, but teachers who have the skills to support those learners. And then lastly, I think we also heard about the importance of teacher voice and ensuring that teachers have a voice in sector dialogue and in policy dialogue, which is one of the key principles for GPE, for example, and for many of the actors here. Second key point, I think, that came up is around, I think, generally speaking, what needs to be done to institutionalize all of these reforms and measures and scale up. So again, in Zambia, we heard about how the small pilot of teaching at the right level has been scaled up, how the ministry has been engaged from the start, and how building ownership and capacity at the ministry has been part and parcel of that program. So that seems to be crucial. And then similarly, I heard from Zimbabwe, from the Deputy Minister, that it was also about ensuring that there was a policy grounding for the shift in terms of early childhood, and working with the evidence that was released by that commission that you mentioned. You also mentioned financing, which of course is key. The third, I think, key topic that came up, brought up by Manos, was around peer learning and its relationship with target setting. And here, I think that's what we're here to do, is to learn from each other, of course. The fact that we have structures now, such as the new peer learning mechanism, but also the informal learning that occurs when we're able to share our experience. And target setting being a way for countries to benchmark with each other and to have a dialogue on the basis of their progress towards certain indicators. And then lastly, I think the last area, picking up on what Armando was saying about citizens, but it's really tied to what we call, I would say, mutual accountability and partnership. So the idea that citizens, that parents and communities should be engaged, the idea of they being the key actors in holding the education system accountable. And I think our colleague from Mozambique also picked up on this in talking about the respective role of parents and communities vis-a-vis teachers. So again, teachers, supporting teachers, scaling up and institutionalizing these reforms, supporting peer learning, and working with citizens and working to ensure partnership and mutual accountability. Those were my 4 key takeaways. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you to the panel for participating and the audience for your questions. As I said, hopefully you can catch up with the panel after this. Thank you, everyone.